Now, the Human Development Index is a composite measure of development based on an assessment of education, life expectancy, and income per capita indicators. Pricewaterhouse Coopers Nigeria estimates that HDI in Nigeria could reach 0.73% from the current 0.51% and attain a status of a high human development country by 2030 if it invests in policies and reforms. Andrew S. Nevin, Chief Economist at Pricewaterhouse Coopers Nigeria, joins me as we explore ways to improve Nigeria's Human Development Index. Thank you so much for joining us, Andrew.
Morning.
Taking a look at your report argues that national policies should be guided not only by improvements in GDP, but also a broader measure of development, for which, of course, the Human Development Index thing comes in. How important is it to measure, to measure an economy by using the Human Development Index? How important is it?
Well, I think we need to step back and ask the question: what's the economy for? Every day, you're in the news business of business. I'm in business. We're reading these headline numbers. GDP's growing, GDP's shrinking. We're in recession here in Nigeria, and we have an obsession with the GDP. But if you stand back a little bit, ask yourself the question, why is GDP important? Presumably, we care about GDP because it affects people's lives, and we think if we have a higher GDP, we'll have better welfare. So then we ask the question, well, is that actually true? Because we've had, obviously a couple of down quarters, but since 2000, Nigeria's economy has grown tremendously. Has that had a widespread benefit to most people in Nigeria? And the answer, unfortunately, is not enough. Too many people in poverty, too many people that are unemployed. So then we stepped back and said, okay, should we actually be measuring something different? Because if you measure something, that's what you're gonna focus on. And if we have the wrong measurement, we're gonna have the wrong policies.
Well, I do agree with you on that note. I mean, a few years back and recently, the statement we also got from the IMF talking about Nigeria still being one of the largest economies to reckon with. I ask myself, I have a feeling that just only happens on paper. What happens to the man, the woman, the boy, the girl who actually make up that economy, those who are supposed to be benefiting from it? I'm going to ask you, what do you make of the current, Human Development Index of Nigeria at the moment?
Well, I think, so as you said in the opening, the Human Development Index has three parts to it. It has education, life expectancy, and also economic or GDP number. It's quite a basic measure. You can go to more, but at least it's a step forward from GDP. So now where is Nigeria? It's at about 0.51, as you said. I think 20 years ago it was at 0.4, so there's been some progress there. But we all live here in Nigeria. We know the potential. So we're just standing up and saying, actually, we need to aim higher on that. And let's leave aside GDP numbers. HDI number, we think we should get to 0.71, and we've tried to show some ways to get there.
Now, taking a look at some of these factors that you've just we mentioned, actually make up for this, which really is of major concern to you? Which of them is the biggest determining factor in terms of measuring a country's development status?
Okay, so in this case, we've now come out and we've said we want to drive HDI up to 0.71. So then the question, if you're a politician or policymaker, you're saying, okay, so tell me how to do that. So then we had to go deeper into it, and we said, okay, what levers are going to make a difference? What do you have to focus on to get that HDI number up? And we did our research, and we said effectively, we think the country should focus on three levers. The first lever is the Corruption Perception Index, and you may recall we wrote a paper earlier this year which we delivered to the Vice President and then released that talked about the economic cost of corruption to Nigeria. So that's one of the levers to focus on. The second lever that we think is very important is labor productivity. So the labor productivity right now in Nigeria is $3.60 US per hour. That's far too low to get where we need to do. And then the third lever that's being talked about right now a lot is ease of doing business. So World Bank again released its report. We came in at 169th. At PwC, we tend not to think about that so much. We just want to think more about the big economies, the big countries. So we looked at Nigeria versus the other countries with over 50 million people, and I think it came in 27th out of 29. So not a good number. But basically, we think if we can design policies around those three underlying factors, we can drive the Human Development Index forward. So corruption, ease of doing business, and labor productivity.
Now I'm going to ask myself, which do we begin to talk about first? You did say let's not concentrate on ease of doing business. Well, that has been a recurring decimal in every conversation. I mean, of course, we need foreign direct investment to come in. We need businesses to begin here. And if the environment is not conducive enough, remain where we are. That's also affecting labor productivity. So let's talk really on the ease of doing business in Nigeria. We are at a very low stance at the moment. We've been talking about this for years. Why do you think nothing is changing?
Well, I think the country's undergoing a fundamental shift. If you go back to the $100 oil days, Nigeria didn't need anyone else. It didn't matter whether it was hard or easy to do business. Nigeria just didn't care. The IOCs had to be here because it was one of the few markets you could get a large amount of oil exported. Nigeria got its share of the proceeds, and it was enough to make the country work. When the oil's $50 and when production is down, Nigeria needs people from the outside. And I think it's that fundamental mindset shift that's not so easy, because many of the policies are the right policies, we've got the right frameworks, but when you bump into the actual administration and the people that issue the permits and the approvals and collect the taxes, I think businesses find it very difficult. Now the thing is, all businesses look at Nigeria because we're such a large country. We're the 7th largest population country. We're going to be the 3rd largest. So you have to look at Nigeria, but you don't have to invest. They'll come and look, but if it's not easier to do business, they won't invest. So I think this wrenching transformation is, we're getting the attention on it finally, and I think now we need the action. And the action has to be both at the federal level and the state level, because the policies have to be right at the top. But when a business comes in to invest, it's going off into a state, it's talking to the governor, it's talking to the commissioners. It has to feel comfortable that its investment is going to be a wise one in that case. So this has demands for every governor, every administration around the country.
So it's about time we actually shift the focus from the federal government now and look at the states, the policies they are making around that in order for them to attract investors to their states. Is that the point you're making?
Right, and I think you're going to see states get competitive with each other, and some states are better at it than others. But I mean, once a business decides to look in Nigeria, it has to be somewhere. If it's going to set up a factory, for example, where is that factory going to be? Is the state going to support it? Is there infrastructure? And businesses are very smart. They're going to very quickly figure out which states are supporting them. But I mean, I think that Lagos is doing a fantastic job, but it's a bit easier. It's the big economy, it's the biggest economy in Africa. But other states are going to have to follow and become an attractive place to invest. And I think one piece that's very critical is the sort of tax approval process. A business wants to know, it understands it needs these 4 approvals, 6 approvals, it pays these taxes. If it finds out, there's another agency or someone else wants to take a new tax that they're not aware of, that's very damaging for the business environment.
Now, just still staying, of course, with the states, I'm saying to myself, is this a policy the states really want to embrace? Because at the moment, the states also focus on the federal government for some kind of bailout plan or the other. Many states are still dependent on proceeds from oil because, hey, that's how they've run their states over the years to begin with. But do you really see them embracing this need to come up with policies that make them a little bit more competitive in order to bring these investors in? Or do you think the states are going to say, we just have to keep on waiting for the federal government? Because let's face it, the larger part of the taxes are still being paid to the federal government, even though the companies are located in our states as well. So do you think it's about time we also see some kind of policy shift, in the tax administration as well?
Well, I think as Pricewaterhouse Coopers, we don't have an official position on this, but let me comment as a Canadian. So in Canada, the resource wealth is actually owned by the province. And they're the ones that control it. They receive the royalties. They also receive income taxes. And we have quite a decentralized system. So I think it's a question for Nigeria, if we're now saying there isn't a big oil allocation, it's not going back to 100. Production's not coming back up. And to be honest, what's the long-term future of oil anyway? I mean, do we really think oil is going to be used in 2050 or 2060 or 2070? And it's not that far away. So there is going to have to be a fundamental economic shift. And do the states have the room to be able to do that, or is there the fiscal framework? I think that's a very fair question. If I was at the state level, I would be saying, okay, if you're forward-looking, I know I need to attract investment. I also get it that my oil allocation can't support my own state. But if we're going to go that direction, I'll do my part, which is create a good business environment. But the federal government might need to think about what's its part in terms of a fiscal framework that allows that to happen. But that's a big step for the country. And as I said, I think what we're observing here, and I've been here since 2008, is is just such a wrenching change in the economic and social structure of the economy. And we wrote our paper earlier this year, Life Beyond Oil. And I think people are starting to absorb that it sounds easy or simple, okay, but actually it's such a massive change. And what are all the ramifications, both at a social level and a political level, that are going to come from that? And we're just starting on that process.
Well, Andrew, my question now is, how difficult really is it? I mean, take a look at a state that's having problems, difficulties paying salaries to begin with. A state that practically produces little or nothing owing to overdependence on oil over the years. But then these resources outside oil exist in your state. Most rural communities in Nigeria, you have people who are actually predominantly farmers. The land is there. When we talk about mining, the land is there as well. And I'm asking myself, how difficult is it to just sit and look inward and say, what do we have? How do we develop what we have? Let's make money that's ours. You talk about Lagos, of course, doing well in the midst of all this, because you have this large concentration of companies here. There's a mass exodus of people from the rural communities coming down to Lagos to meet people. They feel this is where the people are. There's not much land in Lagos, really. So it's basically a human resource that's pushing the state. And I'm saying the states where you still have the natural resource, how difficult is it to just sit down and turn around what you have for your own good? I'm asking, is it that difficult,
Well,
really?
I think the process is happening, but I mean, just to be sort of realistic about it, I mean, the oil price drop started less than 2 years ago. So it really started about November of 2014. We then had an election, so no one was going to react to anything till after the election. And by the time the election came, oil was way down. The allocation to the states was way down. They're starting to sort of think about what are the implications of it. It's only been a little over a year since that. So, in some sense, I think it's unrealistic to expect the states are going to pivot. I mean, they've had this economic and social model for a long, long time, and now we're saying to them, you need to pivot 180 degrees. And we're only a year into this. But I think if we're going to paint a positive story for Nigeria, and we're always optimistic in Nigeria, I think there's a lot happening on the ground as this has seeped in, and obviously agriculture, the mining and metals. But again, at the end of the day, power remains the big issue. If we can solve power, we're going to have a very vibrant manufacturing sector in this country on that. But I have no doubt, because I've seen projects on the people are thinking about it all over the country. And the way the country is going to move forward is not by a few people in Abuja thinking about these things. It's about people in every single state figuring out what's their way forward to be a viable entity. And as I said, if we look forward to 2050, I think it's not just me. There are a lot of commentators that are saying oil is going to be worth zero. So that's not that far away. It's only 34 years away. So sometime in that period, the economy have to completely transition away from oil. But compared to other oil producers, Nigeria's in a fantastic position. I mean, it's not like Saudi, which has already made the decision to pivot, but has a lot less resources, climate than Nigeria. Nigeria has the capability to do this, and in fact, it did have the capability. So I was at a conference on the auto industry the other day, and a lot of the commentators who were in the industry a long time pointed out that Nigeria made more than 200,000 cars a year, assembled them in the 1980s. And this last year we assembled 3,500 cars. So we have the capability. We were the largest exporter of palm oil in the world. We were a major cocoa player. So in fact, the country's had this experience. And I think now that the forced transition's upon us, I think it'll take a few years, but it's not going to take 10 years.
Fantastic. We're going to be talking more, of course, on enhancing labor productivity and reducing the overall level of corruption perception, but that's going to be after the break. I've been speaking with Andrew S. Nevin, Chief Economist at Pricewaterhouse Coopers. We continue our discussion on ways to improve Nigeria's Human Development Index. My guest remains Andrew S. Nevin, Chief Economist at Pricewaterhouse Coopers Nigeria. Thank you so much for staying with me. And just before the break, we're talking, of course, about the ease of doing business, the need for a change in mindset, both from the state and local government in terms of their policies as well. Now, one of the levers you talked about is also enhancing labor productivity. There are those who say Nigeria has an advantage of having a large workforce. The question I like to ask is that large workforce really an advantage if majority of them are not skilled to fit into the right sector we're talking about? Well, what's your take on this in terms of enhancing labor productivity?
Well, I mean, if you want a broad-based prosperity, large middle class, lower middle class, upper middle class, you have to have a productive labor force. At the end of the day, just economically, what you get is more or less tied to your labor productivity. So if we are a low labor productivity country, most people will be poor, just the mathematics of it. So the numbers we put together, labor productivity right now in Nigeria is $3.60. We would like to see it move to about $12 by 2030. But you raise a big issue. People talk about the demographic dividend. Now, why is the demographic dividend so important? The big reason in Nigeria is because it creates a big internal market. So companies are interested in Nigeria because they can come here and they have a market of 180 million people, and the number's growing very fast. Nigeria, I think as most people know by now, will actually overtake the United States in terms of number of people. And in Africa, that's very important because the countries are all so cut up that it's difficult to serve countries from other countries. So it's a huge advantage to Nigeria because you can come to this one market and serve it. But at the same time, if that labor is not productive, we're not going to get anywhere. And we have the danger of creating a kind of underemployed, unemployed, young segment that is just creates social problems, frustration at the individual level. And we're already seeing that. I mean, I know so many young people coming out with their NYSC, and they're really struggling in this economy to get a job. So focusing on getting the labor productivity up is important. Now, what are some of the sectors? A couple of key sectors. There's one is just agriculture. And we were talking off camera that rice, locally made rice, is still more expensive than rice from Thailand or from Vietnam. Now, that doesn't make any economic sense. We have the perfect climate here. We have enough water. We have all the varieties that we need. It can't be more expensive to make rice here than if we import it from those places. But that comes down to labor productivity, the way we're deploying in agriculture. I think the other sector, though, that's absolutely critical here is construction, particularly residential construction. I think the number is we're short about 20 million residential homes. To put those homes together requires different elements to come together, financing elements, land registry, but it also requires a lot of people to build those homes. And those jobs are skilled jobs. I mean, to lay the bricks, to do the electrical work, to do the finishing are skilled jobs, and people can be trained at it. But those are two areas that can absorb a lot of labor at a higher productivity and really drive us forward.
So the thing is, how do we begin to introduce this need now, to have a skilled workforce? It's just about having a large workforce. It's about having a skilled and productive workforce. Where should it begin?
Well, I think the connectivity between the business community and the education system has to be improved, right? And if you go back to countries 100 years ago, Germany, Europe, even the United States, I mean, they had a much more effective kind of apprenticeship system. And even today, they're suffering because that's gone backwards. And people are recognizing that a lot of time, I mean, a university degree is fantastic, but actually what the individual needs is a good job, a skilled job. It might be medical, dental, it might be in construction, and it's not necessarily a university degree. So, and part of it is also just a mentality to realize, actually, if you are a skilled plumber, you're going to be gainfully employed and make more money than if you have a degree in marketing, possibly from a university. So that orientation has to come through. But I think, like a lot of industries, if you take construction, you actually need very big players that are prepared to control it end to end. Like if you look at the people that have really had the courage to come into Nigeria and build something big, like MTN, it's because they control it end to end, right? So if you're going to be a construction player who's building some of these $20 million homes, you're going to have to be prepared to play in every part of the system, including making sure that you upskill your people, because you're not going to find your skilled carpenters, your skilled masons, et cetera. You're going to have to take people that have the underlying values, have some basic education, and provide 6 or 12 months training to do that. And the only way you're going to recoup your investment is you control it end to end. But if I contrast it for a minute with an industry where they don't control it end to end, you can see the issues in the power industry. So no one controls the power industry end to end. No one's big. No one like Siemens or GE stepped up to say we're going to do that. So when you have the industry chopped up in the Nigerian environment, it creates a lot of difficulties.
What role does the private sector play in all of this? Just like what you said, there has to be a communication, a link between the education institutions and the business communities. Over time, we concentrate more on what the government should do and what the government shouldn't do. Let's take a look at, say, the service industry, for instance. You have graduates now working in hotels. They actually stand to work as waiters or even hotel managers. And a question popped. Nigerians who keep complaining about poor services in most of these industries. Restaurants are opening on a daily. Hotels are opening on a daily. People need someone to give them good service. But I noticed that there is no institution, if there are, I haven't heard of them, that are actually offering some form of internship program or training for people to step into this sector. So when you talk with business owners who run the hotel business, they tell you it's appalling. You don't get the right people you need to fill this position. So I'm saying to myself, such sectors that where you have to deal one-on-one with humans. What is the private sector doing to actually, to fill that gap, to be that middleman? Is it that difficult, really?
Well, I think if we take the hospitality sector, you're right, there isn't sort of formal programs here, but I think the big hotels have now become sort of the entry points to creating this ecosystem. And I've certainly, my time in Nigeria and Lagos, I think the service levels have gone up, though there's still a long way to go. But if I go to the better hotels or now to the restaurants, you can see this seeping through. I think what's happening is the hotels like 4 Points, Sheraton System, or Intercontinental have been prepared to step up. They've had to hire a lot of people. They recognize they had to give their own training. And then what happens is those people, as their standards come up, they filter out to other restaurants, et cetera. So it all sort of comes up. And if we look at, it's not too dissimilar to our situation at Pricewaterhouse Coopers or our competitors. We actually do our own screening for people. People write a test to come in because we're not always sure about the value of the degree. We screen down. We bring in, I believe, 120 graduates. We have a training program. And over time, some of them stay with us, but many then go on to other companies in their finance department or other departments. Some of them are in public service. So you need the big organizations to create good training programs, and then it's okay if they leave you because they'll still benefit the economy. So you need people like us, people like the big hotels, people like Dangote. I think one sector where some people have done it very well is the banks. So some of the banks have excellent intake programs. They'll take people when they're young and train them properly. But the one thing about an apprenticeship program is the apprentice needs to realize he or she is not going to be paid very much for a while, that they are getting something of real value. And 10 years, 20 years down the road, they'll be way further ahead. But 2, 3, 4 years, it's going to be a small wage, but that's the deal. But
then, it's a sacrifice worth taking. If that's going to catapult you to where you need to be in the next 5 years, I think that's worth taking. But just before we go, we need to talk about the most important, if you ask me, the corruption perception. We have been on this for decades now.
So as I said before, we put out our paper this year. I think in our view, we put out the paper. We said that the economy basically could be $500 billion a year bigger in 2030 than it's going to be if we improve corruption, not to the level of Norway, but even to the level of, in this case, Ghana or Malaysia. It has to be solved. But I think that there's a couple of things that can make one optimistic. One is just, when oil is at $100, there's just a lot more resources floating around where your balance between creating value and capturing value tilts towards capturing value. If there's that much resources floating around, wouldn't your optimal strategy be to capture value? But today we don't have that value to capture. So if we don't create it in Nigeria, there is nothing to capture. I think the second thing is, though, there are some technologies that are coming along that are going to fundamentally change this. So at PwC, in my client service, I'm focused on the financial sector. I serve the banks, the insurance companies here. Blockchain is something that is coming, a technology that basically allows you to trace every transaction with an undisputable history. And that, in our view, is going to be what basically wipes out corruption around the world. Because once you can trace every large payment, and it has exactly what it was for, who it went for, what it was exchanged, what was it exchanged for, et cetera, then a lot of what we've seen becomes impossible to do on that. So we're very big believers that we're trying to bring it to Nigeria. There's a lot of interest here in Nigeria and its use, all sorts of reasons, but one of the reasons is because it can take on this corruption issue.
Andrew, I really agree with you on that note, because I think it's easier to nip it in the bud than having to wait later to begin to go after corrupt leaders or corrupt business owners to get the money back, or even,
That's, absolutely right. Retrospectively, to go back and try to recover diverted funds is a hopeless task. It has to, right from the beginning, you have sort of enough transparency that it's not going to happen. But as I said, I think the new technology is going to make a big difference, and I think as people realize the technology is coming, they're going to say, I can't start down this path because of that. The other issue about corruption, of course, is it's just incredibly important that more and more people don't participate in it, because it's very difficult if you're in an organization, everyone around you is participating in it, to not be drawn into it. It's very much a crowd effect in corruption on that. So, but as I said, I think there's some reasons to be optimistic.
Fantastic. Well, I'm actually looking forward to that technology coming in. It is long overdue. It's really been very interesting getting your view on developing Nigeria's Human Development Index. Thank you so much, Andrew. I've been speaking with Andrew S. Nevin, Chief Economist at Pricewaterhouse Coopers Nigeria.